Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. It's another beautiful day up in the north. The days of rain just stopped and the snow is mostly melted. This gives me a chance to get away from printing and walk the yard a bit. But when I did, I stumbled across these things all over the ground, which got my mind going on another 3D print to make. No, these little things aren't natural. We were actually doing some target shooting over here with airsoft guns. These, I'm gonna say toy guns, shoot these little 6mm round plastic BBs. So the idea ran through my head to use them in a radial bearing. My hopes are to end up with something like this that I found on Wikipedia. This jug holds 2,000 of them, so if I feel like making a lot of bearings, I've got the ammo to do so. See what I did there? These guns are pretty realistic, and they're basically not toys at all. The BBs get loaded in this clip individually. It looks like there's some in there. Let's get one out and look at it. Whoops. See, I spend a lot of time picking these things up from everywhere. Getting into this, I had to have Google tell me what they were made from. It answered ABS or PLA. Anybody who has one of these knows that these BBs are durable, and for some reason they're attracted to anything with a flat screen. I have some first-hand experience with this from back in the day. Ever since then, they've been outside toys. I know that these things are tough, and I've probably seen some broken apart at some point. I just wasn't paying attention to them the same way I want to now. Let's grab one of these and just see how tough they are. I just want to crush one and get a good feel of the force that it takes, and the mode of failure. I mean, is it brittle? You know, it withstands a decent amount of force. I expected it to shatter, but it felt more like a gumball. Once it's broken, it's pretty brittle, just flaking apart almost like dry clay on the inside. I guess I'm willing to try it out and see how it does. So now I collected this bag's worth from out the yard, and I want to learn more about them. Like, are they really 6mm? And how close to spherical are they? Nope, lost one there into the abyss. Oh yeah, I can already tell you they're nice and round. These little buggers are rolling around everywhere. Even though they seem round, I guess I still need to measure them and get a 3D print to fit around them. Yeah, this one is 0.235 inches and 6mm is 0.236, so I'd say it's close enough for government work. Let's just check another one and see if the dimension jumps around at all. And just so that we're all on the same page, here's a really quick summary on bearings. A bearing reduces friction and constrains motion between moving parts. The first use of bearings was thought to be during the construction of the pyramids. It wasn't until Da Vinci that there were plans drawn up for how to make a bearing. In the Industrial Revolution, bearings were put into designs for axles such as this one by Philip Vaughan, and they've just been a thing ever since. There's bearings for light loads, heavy loads, radial with some thrust involved, bearings that allow movement, some designed for mostly thrust, some with adjustable preloads, and different internal clearances. You might be wondering, a bearing has so many parts, how can it be 3D printed? Well, my goal is to simplify it in just the main parts, and hopefully I can get something to spin around here soon. Before I get into the design, there's charts available that show all the standard trade size bearings. My goal is to start small, so I'm just going to choose this one. It's an R8 bearing. What better place to start the model than with the bearing ball itself? I modeled the ball starting with a semicircle a little smaller than what I actually measured, then revolved this around the center line to create a sphere. So I chose to make this R8 bearing. After some thought on how to do it, I ended up with this sketch. You can see the 1/2 inch bore, the 1 1/8 OD, and the 1/4 inch thickness with the Conrad style deep ball grooves. Then, just like making the 6mm sphere, I have to revolve this profile around an axis to make it a solid. It made it start to look like a bearing, but you're probably noticing that there's this other solid thing where the balls are supposed to go. I just need to revolve some spheres into it a little bit bigger than what the ball measured to be. But I only have to do this once. The rest of the pockets will be patterned around the central axis with any quantity I choose. Let's increment it upwards and see how it looks. Yeah, that doesn't look so bad. Right now there's 3 parts in this one model. The cage separates the 2 raceways with a little bit of clearance on either side. I'm kind of wondering how it's going to work myself. Just for reference, here's what it looks like with the balls all in place. And this is just a habit, but I always section through the model before I print it, just as a precaution. I mean, it looks good to me. There's clearance around the balls, there's a gap between the raceways. I don't see anything alarming at this point. I just don't plan on printing the balls themselves, so I'm gonna have to take them out before exporting. This is what I plan on printing right here, so let's go. Almost not worth the time lapse, but let's get it off of here. It looks like it printed out okay, but right away I can tell you that the ball cage is fused to the inner race. The outer race printed exceptionally well. It looks like I have some separating to do here. Let's get these 2 apart. And this is fused tighter than what I thought. I'm going to have to bring out the heavy artillery and cut it apart. And this is never fun to do. You'd think it cuts easy, but it doesn't. Well, the disappointing part is that the race got totally destroyed. I tried to keep it intact the best I could. The inner race, now that I can see it, printed out pretty good too and wasn't damaged. So from the videos I saw on the internet, these things go together by offsetting the inner race all to one side while the balls are placed in the open gap between the races. So let's give that a try. The design calls for 8 bearings. Let's see if they fit. I just have this one extra that doesn't seem to be going in too easily. Let's just make sure I'm not trying to stick 9 in here instead of 8. Nope, it's the 8th one. Looks like the outer race is becoming deformed here. Well, I tried my best and it's still not falling together. I'm just going to continue with 7 balls and see where that takes me. I mean, it kinda works, but it's not really acting like a bearing. I'm leaning towards saying that a 6mm ball isn't intended for this size bearing. I'm gonna get them spread out a little bit and see if I can install the ball cage onto it. This is one of those it's already broken type situations, and I'm just trying to get some ideas on how to proceed with it. Aside from the raceways being deformed, the balls being squeezed too tight, the cage being completely broke, and missing a ball, not bad, right? But putting this together did give me some ideas on how to move forward and hopefully get something that works. So I jumped back to the bearing chart and looked at the dimensions of the R10 bearing, which is supposed to be a 5/8 inch bore. I think I'm going to try to keep the 1/2 inch inside but use the larger 1 3/8 inch OD. Here you can see that the OD got quite a bit larger while keeping the original ID. And of course the wider width. The increased thickness of the outer race should give more stability to the plastic. The inner race also has a much thicker wall for strength. The other thing this created was a larger diameter for the 8 balls to fit into, giving them more spacing in between. With these changes, I also decided to open up the gap between the inner race and the ball cage. The intent is to be able to print this part together as shown here, as one print, which produces 3 separate parts. Then jump into the assembly with the balls just to show a quick size comparison of this new bearing model versus the old sizing. And it didn't feel like much, but the OD is quite a bit larger. This new one is just a little bit thicker too. I didn't realize it when I made the first one, but the 6mm ball diameter was almost the full width of the bearing itself. I probably should have caught that in the design, but hey, we're all human, right? Yeah, so again here, the inside diameter is the same, but all the other dimensions grew significantly. Just hoping this one prints out good now. World's fastest time lapse. This thing's pretty cool so far. Not much filament and something around 20 minutes to print. But for some reason, even after all that effort, the inner ring and cage still seem to be stuck together. Found a good use for this extra scrap filament I had laying around. This outer race already feels way more durable. But as you notice, the ball cage and inner race are still eluding me. I had high hopes for this one too. Everything came out really nice except the cage. Well, let's get it broken apart. Man, with less filament holding these together, they still won't just snap apart. Gonna have to break out the knife again. While I'm doing that, it gives me a chance to show off the rest of the channel, where you can watch me struggle with all the other videos I posted. Then if you go over to this website, thingiverse.com, you can find all the models that are associated with these videos. And check it out, I'm super giddy about this one that made it to the top row of page 1. If you don't have a Thingiverse account, don't worry, all these same models are on my printables page, just search for Sanford Prime. Now that that's out of the way, I finally got the pieces apart, and they look great. I was concerned about the stitching lines that appeared in the raceway and how the balls would behave across them, but that's about all that looks questionable so far. I guess I won't find out until I try it, so let's try to get this new one together. Are all 8 balls gonna fit? Oh wow, that was light years better. I want to separate them a bit so I can get the cage over them, but it seems like they're pretty loose and just rolling out of all the places I try to put them. I don't know at this point if that's good or bad. I'll just try to get them situated under the cage as I seat it down. Just go for it, right? And with that, it all just snapped in place. There it is, it's done. Hey, it works. This thing is surprisingly smooth. It's so spinny. It's honestly not what I expected. This one went together pretty easy too. It looks like there's plenty of room for the balls in there. The ball cage doesn't seem to be snagging and it just spins pretty freely. I just can't get over how good it spins though. The balls are rolling around and not just skidding through the raceway. This is awesome. Apply a little bit of load to it and it feels like a bearing, just gliding across the hand. Vroom. Yeah, cool. I had a little bit of filament remaining on the spool, so I chanced it. Turns out this little bit was just enough with a little bit left over to throw through a 3D pen someday. And now I have another one to mess around with. Honestly, these little things are probably the reason this video took so long to make. They make neat little fidget toys. So I could use this bearing in lots of future projects, but I didn't really have to rack my brain too much to figure out this would be a nice core to a fidget spinner. I jumped back into the bearing model and filled in the bore in the middle. Speaking of the grip, I needed to make it feel nice on the hands with some chamfers. Then I dished out one of the sides where I added a few grippy serrations. This is starting to look cool, right? From there, I went to draw the spokes, then extrude them up to the back side of the outer bearing race. Then, to dress it up a little bit, some designs to kind of show the core bearing part, some ergonomic fillets all around it, and some other patterns on each one of the spokes. These surface patterns are on both sides just to put a nice spin to the model. And there we have it, from bearing to fidget spinner. The other thing to address was the separation of the parts after print. Just to ensure I didn't have to spend any more time with a sharp knife, I decided to make some configurations of this part so I could print each piece separately. If I just wanted to print the cage, I can now select a configuration that hides all the other parts. Let's just say a cage breaks or something too. Now I don't have to print everything. Inner ring, same thing. Click that configuration to isolate it from everything else. Then the outer ring is also capable of being independent, you know, just in case. So let's get all three of these parts into the slicer. The outer race, the inner race, and the bearing cage. Just dragging them out here so they're separated a little, because now I'm paranoid of them sticking together. Oops, they're hanging below the build plate. That could have been bad. Drag these things up so they're fully above. Alright, that looks good to me. Time to slice. Looks like I'll be back here in about 5 hours. Luckily, 5 hours of my time only meant 3 seconds for you. Well, so far so good. Everything looks like it printed without any issues. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting any issues either since the original bearing turned out so good. I'm just kind of anxious to get this thing together and test it out. A little dry fitting is in order for the what is still only 3 parts that make this up. Yeah, it looks good, so let's get the balls in. Again, I just put the inner race inside of the outer race offset like this. Then I keep piling all 8 balls in. And they should just fall into place here. And they're not going. They seem to be stuck. I think I see the problem though. If I just lift the outer race a little bit to wiggle them in, maybe that'll help. Nope. So this is what the new problem is. The inner raceway that the balls are supposed to travel in sits above the center line of the 6mm balls, creating a wall that they just can't jump over. This comes from when I extended the inner race for the finger holes out past the thickness of the spinner spokes. Now when I set both pieces flat on the table as shown here, The ball looks like it can jump up into the outer race, but the inner race's edge completely prevents it from getting into position. So I made a fixture. Well, a piece of cardboard with a hole in it. I was looking around for something about the same thickness as the plastic that was added to the inner race, and this checked all the boxes. See what I did there? Well, the hole is cut so that the inner race can fall below the tabletop just a little, hopefully evening out the two raceways. Back to the task at hand, let's get the balls into this. Looks like it just might work. Yes! Counting just to make sure I didn't trick myself with installing less than 8 balls. Before I pick this thing up, I just want to spread them out a little bit. I get the feeling that if they're all off to one side, it's just going to fall apart again. Oh man, that is smooth. Alright, it isn't done until this cage goes on. This cage keeps the balls spaced out evenly to make sure that the load is distributed through the assembly properly, and keeping the balls spread out evenly ensures that they don't slide all to one side during use. The same way this thing went together, it can come apart. Being that these things are looser in the housing, it's difficult to get them to stay equally spaced to fit the cage on. I'm just going to have to place the cage on and hope for the best while I juggle these balls around. There it is, it just snapped into place. And all the ball spaces are taken up by the balls, so should be good to go. A quick spin. Now that is awesome. It seems pretty sturdy. There's a lot more inertia to the outer race now too that keeps it going way longer than the little bearings before. I get the feeling this is going to be the new desktop toy around here. It's actually pretty fun, and knowing that it wasn't bought from a store makes it even better. And the cool thing about it too is that there's no metal parts. This is a handheld metal detector. Yeah, the batteries are in it. See, I only cheated a little bit with the balls, but they're still plastic. And because the middle race sticks out like this, it's capable of sitting on a tabletop and spinning. Getting this made was pure satisfaction, and I'm happy it finally worked out. I found myself picking this thing up all the time and flinging it around. It's really gotten quite addicting. The more I spin it around too, the more freewheeling it gets to. The bad thing about it, I know this thing's going to disappear quickly. I'm going to have to print more. Just keep tweaking it until it works the way you want it, right? What started off as a failure turned into a pretty nice bearing at my disposal for future projects, and it's still fun to play with on its own. These bearings turned into a completely awesome fidget spinner that I can give away to people who never knew they needed one of these. I think I'm going to swap the colors out so that each piece is a separate color, just for some curb appeal. Oh, one done. It spins pretty good. I'm almost certain that these spin better without the cage in place. I mean, look at this. There's like zero friction here. But the cage serves a purpose, and unfortunately it has to go on. Yeah, I mean, it still works really well, but the cage just introduces a little bit more friction is all. That's number 2. That's got to be the best spin yet, actually. This thing just keeps going. Number 3. These things just spin awesome. Yeah, not a bad evolution here. I learned a lot from the first bearing by trial and error. The clearances needed between the parts, the increased thickness and diameters needed to keep the raceways from deflecting, and the larger ball path diameter to make sure all the balls could fit during assembly. As I said before, all this led to a pretty neat radial ball bearing that is functional as well as fun to play with. The best part is that these things don't take up a lot of filament. There's only a couple wraps left on the spool for this one. And it just spins so surprisingly well for using some balls that would have otherwise rotted away out in the yard. The crown jewel though is this thing. So far it's been a blast. I get the feeling that I'm going to be printing a lot of these. And I'm off to a good start with that too.